welcome to this video. In this video series, which I'm estimating is going to go for about 14 days, we're going to essentially walk through and create the most efficient and AI-powered CRM in the world in 2025. That is not an exaggeration, and once I jump into this, I think you're going to see that for yourself. But in addition to that, this entire thing is custom built from the ground up. So in addition to being the most efficient, it's probably going to be the cheapest as well. This currently costs us about 150 USD to run for a team of 20. So pretty cheap, pretty efficient, and the entire thing is going to be AI powered through and through. Now, if you run any kind of service-based business, what we're going to be doing is walking through the entire service lifecycle from client acquisition to project delivery and exploring how we can actually utilize real useful AI automations to actually shave time and improve efficiency and quality of your delivery process. So this is not going to be just soft, soppy AI automations that you're seeing 95% of the AI automations that are out there on the market right now. These are real automations that are actually going to solve problems. If you're wondering why you should be listening to me on any of these kind of things, I spent the last 5 years as a freelancer on Upwork, developing and building internal tools and processes for other people's businesses in a really wide range of industries. And then a year and a half ago, I went and developed my own low-code development studio or agency, which has completed over 250 projects for clients all over the world. So I've done a lot of hands-on building with both internal tools and processes and also AI automation. So without further ado, I'm going to jump in here and I'm going to show you exactly how we're going to take apart each individual step of the service delivery lifecycle, explain how we're going to use AI and automation to bolster that, and then in the next 14 days, I'm going to go through and actually build these completely live and on camera for you guys to see and implement into your own businesses. So let's jump right into it. What you're going to see on my screen here is the rough life cycle for any service-based business. Now, obviously there's going to be differences depending on the industry that you're in and the niche, but the rough framework or structure is largely very, very similar. So what happens is a lead comes through, we create a client object for that lead. So your client is your email, first name, last name, address, so on and so forth. That lead progresses through some sort of Kanban board or flow, and it's either qualified or not qualified. If it's qualified, it's converted to an estimate. We develop a quote or proposal for that estimate. If that quote or proposal is accepted, it translates into a project. Now we have the CRM side of that project, which is your financials and managing invoices and expenses, reporting, etc. And we have the workspace for that project. So the way that all the tasks are posted, the communication channels relevant to the project, all the common resources, any documentation, so on and so forth. So the workspace is where the actual, you can call it the content management system or the CMS side of the project happens. And then we've got the CRM side, which is where the financials, the invoices, and the financial management of the project happens. Now, obviously certain steps of this can be skipped. So you'll see I've got some lines here. For example, if you have a personal friend that comes through and wants a project built, then maybe you skip that whole lead section so a client can progress straight to an estimate. The same case can happen. A client can progress straight to a project. Maybe you're not working on a fixed price project and you're doing a more agile based project delivery method or something like that. So as I said, there's differences here, but as we go through and add these automations, you'll see they're all pretty relevant to anybody that's in the service-based industry and even the product-based industry, to be honest. Now, I'm going to separate this introduction video into two separate sections. The first section is we're going to walk through each of these processes and explain how AI and automation can improve these. And then the next is going to be going through these steps, which are basically the step-by-step process that I'm going to use to actually implement these. And these steps are really going to be the follow-up videos where I actually dive in and build out these automations live in N8N and in our CRM development platform. So you can see exactly how we're actually going to go about building this really complex CRM off the back of our existing CRM. So you'll see on the left side here, I've attached some screenshots from our existing CRM, just so you can get a bit of a visualization understanding of what's happening in each of these stages. It probably looks very similar to whatever CRM tool you're using. So first off, we have clients in the platform and leads. So I'll start with leads. I know I have clients above leads here because whenever a lead comes in, we're actually creating a client object for that. So the client object is the basis of everything underlying a quote, a job, or a project, so on and so forth. But I'll start with leads. So what happens is, hypothetically, a lead comes through your landing page, possibly it comes through some advertisements, and a client object that's attached to that lead. Now, what I've done is I've added these tags so that you can actually see where AI is going to help boost these processes. So the first one is on the client that is created from a lead. Now, two things I've got here are client sentiment and a client description. What happens behind the scenes to this leads process is usually you'll jump on a number of discovery calls or meetings with the client to understand their requirements and their problems so that you can develop a service that's going to solve those problems. So there's a number of meetings. There's also a number of email correspondences, possibly even text message correspondences, and however you do business. Now, what should happen is every single correspondence, whether that's on a phone call, on a meeting, via email, etc., that happens between you and a client should be upserted into what's called a vector database, which is basically just the knowledge base for an AI agent to then go ahead and make decisions in your business. So what we do is we transcribe all your meetings, we get all that communication in text, we upsert it to an AI's knowledge base, and from that we can start to populate fields like a client sentiment field. Now, if you envision this field here, or this list view of your clients, you could possibly have a sentiment heading, and it could actually be just like a progress bar from 0 to 10, for example, that monitors all the communications with your client and starts to pick up on tone and sentiment to recognize when a client might start to be getting unsatisfied with your service. So you could say, for example, set up notifications for whenever the sentiment drops below, let's hypothetically say 7 out of 10, you get a notification so that you can start to ensure that you're redirecting resources to try and fix that problem and ensure that client sentiment stays above a certain number. So that's one really useful field that you can constantly monitor and change and show almost like the client health status in your CRM. The other one is the client description. Now, as you work more and more with a client, you have more meetings and you understand more about the client, you can further populate this client description field so that you develop a really good understanding of who your client is, the way they like to operate, the way they communicate, and you can start to really make sure that your service, your proposals, everything is tailored to that individual client. So you can then use AI to constantly be scraping all the communications to build a really comprehensive description of every client. So that's one field where we can really boost what traditionally was just a static object. You added a client into your CRM and that was really, maybe you updated some notes on the client every couple months, and that's a manual process that was taking time from your staff, where AI can keep a really close track of these kind of fields and constantly update them as your project moves through the product lifecycle or service lifecycle. That is clients. Next up, we have leads. Now, similar to leads, we obviously are still adding sentiment to the client description and client sentiment fields that are on the client, but we have a couple of extra fields we could add to a lead. Now, some hypothetical fields include the sales health. So we can analyze all of the discovery calls, outbound cold calls, whatever the case is, sales calls with a client, and we can start to provide feedback to your sales agents using AI that's trained on a model or some sort of particular sales method. We can provide real insights and feedback to your sales agents so that they can get better at pitching, recognizing client problems and pitching your service. And we can really give some sort of metric on the skill and talent of your sales team, for example, or even the sales health of each lead that's on your board and how close they are or how warm or cold that particular lead is. Another one is client suitability. So you might sell a really niche service and you may have a lot of people that come through your funnel and they're interested in a product or a service that's similar to yours, but sometimes it could be really down your alleyway. So a project that you guys have built a number of times, it's perfectly suited to your service. And sometimes you might get someone that is slightly suited to your service or maybe not suited to your service at all. And so what we can do is use AI to transcribe all the communications and indicate whether or not a lead is well qualified for your service or not. The last one is client rating. What I mean by this is we've all heard stories about horror clients, painful people, really negative people, people that are very difficult to please. And that has a whole lot of knock-on effects that can sometimes be difficult to measure on your business. It causes pain for your project managers, causes pain for your development team, and it's generally often things that really want to be avoided. And on the other hand, we have really good clients that understand your service, they understand the industry and how it works, they're understanding, they communicate well, they're positive in the way they speak. So we can build some sort of client rating system to determine what are A+ clients and clients that could be really easy to work with, and what are B, C, D clients that could be really difficult to work with, long communication times, etc., etc. So that's another thing that we could build onto our leads board to really help qualify clients. So this builds a really detailed qualification process that helps you determine and improve the quality of the leads coming through to your business. So those are the first two. And as you can see, these things are not typically done in pretty much all of your CRM platforms. So that's the first two. Let's see where we can go from here. So next up, you're probably looking to build some sort of estimate or quote. Now, in our process, we do a discovery document first, and essentially what that document is it's an outline of the client's problem, and it's a really detailed scope document on, possible solutions to that problem, services that you could use, competitor analysis, branding guidelines, so on and so forth. There's a number of different things in that document. And what we can do is we can use AI to populate a lot of that document. Now, this is really useful for a number of scenarios. One, it saves your team having to review all these meetings, remember things that were said in meetings that could have been 2-3 weeks ago or further. And it automatically generates this instantly. So it's saving your team 10, 20, 30 plus hours right there and then. The other thing it's doing is it's likely to be more accurate because it remembers everything, it's trained on all the communications and all the meetings that you've had. And lastly, it's also trained on all of your previous projects. So if you've completed a number of discovery processes or proposals that are possibly similar to this new project's proposal, it's going to have access to that data to help develop more accurate discovery phase documentation. Now, the other thing this is really, really good for is if you have multiple team members. So you may have a sales agent that handles the discovery and possibly a number of the calls in that lead phase, let's say, for example, and then you may transition that project onto a project manager after that point. And so you want to hand over detailed documentation on what the client wants, who they are, what kind of person they are, what problems they have to that project manager so that they can take on that project and continue the client through the service lifecycle or process without feeling really disoriented, without having to ask repetitive questions that have already been asked earlier on in the process. So you can build a simple or really smooth transition from the sales stage to the actual project delivery stage. Now, with this documentation, you can then go ahead and do things like estimate for milestones, costings, and estimate items for a project if you're quoting a fixed price project, and you can help build a proposal that's going to have timeframes, costings, and all of those things in there. So the AI agent will be really well trained on the project, the problem is trying to solve, and also all of your historically completed projects to be able to build a really accurate proposal, which you can then send off to the client. So just to show you what these steps look like, you've obviously got your leads Kanban board here. Then that's converted into an estimate. So you build your milestones. And then that's usually transferred into a proposal. So there'll be a long 10-15 page proposal document outlining everything from the scope of work, the features, timeline, the handover support documentation, etc., etc. And then we progress to a project. So if that quote or proposal is accepted and you want to jump into a project, we then create a project in your CRM platform. And this is a list of projects. This is what it typically looks like. You've got your client, you've got your profit and loss and key metrics on your list of projects and who it's assigned to. There's a number of things we have in the CRM side. So I'll look at the CRM side first, and then I'll take a look at the workspace side. So the CRM side is typically where the financial reporting happens. So where we can track the financial metrics of a project. We can send invoices, we can register expenses and bills, we can view reporting and timesheet logging and see where we're profitable, if we're not profitable, things like that. So we've got the project details page. You can see up the top here, we've got invoices, so sending out invoices. We can build sprints in here if we're operating on a more agile project delivery method, or we can use deliverables, which is essentially just your quoted estimate items that you sent out in your proposal from the previous stage. We've got reporting, so we can look at labor and bills against the invoiced amounts to understand the project health. Now, there's a lot of fields that we can use AI for here. We can use AI to dynamically create invoices really quickly. We can use AI to create sprints. We can use AI to ask all sorts of questions like current bottlenecks in the project, which tasks are over and under budget, how a project's tracking against estimated timeframes, and all sorts of other smart metrics that can even display on your dashboard for each project. So there's a lot of things we can do with that data, but again, it's all going to be upserted into our AI agent's knowledge base so that it can source that information and you can ask it quick questions with anything to do with a project, really. The other thing we do is we set up the workspace for a project. So a workspace typically looks something like this in our CRM. So we've got the general dashboard page, any key links relevant to a project. You can invite co-workers and clients into a project. We store things like all of the meetings, and we can assign meetings to relevant people so that they can rewatch a meeting if they need to, or if they weren't even present on the meeting, they can still access that meeting. And we generate AI-based action items and notes, etc. Documentation, just somewhere we can store documentation about a project. And then we have the task lists and the chat channels and direct messages. So task lists operate similar to your traditional Kanban board operations like Trello, Asana, and Jira. You can assign all sorts of people to these task lists, and you can allow people to log timesheets against these tasks, which then show up in your reporting, so you can understand which tasks are taking a significant amount of time, how much they're costing, etc., etc. And all this information is stored in your database. In addition to that, you've got the communication channels, and what's awesome about this is you can invite a client into your platform, so all of the communications that happen in a project, all that data, that conversation data, is owned by you. It's in your own database, which means you can then allow your AI to access it, and so you can get really accurate understandings of how a project is progressing, current status, current client sentiment. It's all there because all of the communication is happening in a domain that you can control, or with data that you can access. So with all of that, I know I've been talking a lot, but you can see how all of this information is stored in one primary location, or how these processes operate, and where the opportunity for AI is basically everywhere in here. And you can see real tangible applications which are going to not only save possibly hundreds of hours or thousands of hours a year on manual tasks, but also dramatically improve efficiency and be able to track metrics that historically were not possible because of how many manual human hours it would take to actually track those metrics. So much opportunity here. And the second step of what I'm going to do is talk through the actual automation steps and how I'm going to go about implementing these AI automations into our CRM processes or business processes to actually develop these features. So I've got, I think, 11 or 12 steps here, 11 steps. Now, these may slightly change as I go through and build them. As always, plans never truly go 100% to plan. But what these are going to be is separate videos where I'm going to go through each of these processes live on camera, and I'm going to document how I do it so that you can implement these exact same processes into whatever CRM or business processes you use individually. So step one is communication. So to be able to build a lot of the client sentiment fields and really to build a knowledge base of a client and understand that client really deeply, we have to capture all of the communication back and forth with a client so that we can then start to build a knowledge base that understands a client and continually grows as a project progresses and we do more and more communication. So that's going to be broken down into 3 steps. 1, meetings must be transcribed. So we have to set up some sort of process where someone can transcribe that meeting as some sort of, we can either use a third-party tool, or a lot of platforms like Google Meet actually allow you to transcribe the meetings natively. We have to transcribe the meetings, we have to extract that transcription, and we have to attach the transcription to the client object in our database. And then we have to upsert all of that information to what's called a vector database, which is basically just an AI's knowledge base so that the AI can easily use that information. So that's what we've got here. The other thing we have to do is set up a workflow to upsert all of the inbound and outbound emails with a client so that we can store that information as well. And the third thing is we have to set up a workflow where all of the messages in our CRM system between a client are upserted so that we're storing all of the communication. So that's step 1. Now, step 2 is now that we have that communications information all stored in a vector database, we can now set up a workflow to do things like update the client sentiment and the client description when more of these meetings and communication data is added. Now, step 3 is to build some documentation or a discovery phase for the client if they proceed to the scoping phase or possibly even to a project. So what we want to do is we want to get all of the information that's been scoped out in that sales process on the client problem, the problems they want to solve, what features they might want, etc., built into a clear documentation so that we can then hand that on to a project manager or even just use it to help build proposals, estimate milestones, etc. Now, in our case, we're a software development agency. So with that discovery phase documentation, what we want to do is we want to use it to help build a design file. Now, what a design file is essentially a mock-up of a business's or an application that someone wants to develop. We want to use that documentation to pass to some sort of AI tool like lovable.dev, which is a popular software MVP tool, to help build an interactive design for clients so that they can understand exactly what the app's going to look like and start to visualize their application and how it's going to solve their problems. Now, next up, we want to use all of this information to pass to an estimate to help build milestones and help build a detailed proposal that's going to estimate the costs and timeframes of a project. From there, we then can translate this into a project and do things like pass across the invoiced amounts, start to build tasks in a task board based on what we quoted in that estimate. Now, next up, we'll implement some smart project management. So how can we use the information, the communications as a project is progressing to give smart updates to a project manager on things like client sentiment, how we're tracking against timeframes, etc. How can we use AI and automation to make the project manager's life as easy as possible? Now, next up in our application, which I didn't talk about before, we actually sync transactions from the company account as well. So what I've included in here is for people that want smart accounting or AI-based accounting. Can we use AI to provide analytics on possible areas where, unused subscriptions, for example, possible expenditure that is questionable that we may not need, and just some sort of smart analytics around our expenses to make sure that we're not wasting money in areas which is not useful. Now, the next one I've got here is an AI social media scheduler. Now, again, this is separate to projects, but what we've actually built in our CRM is a tool that allows you to upload photos and text content and then schedule that to be posted across currently X and LinkedIn, but we'll probably add Instagram in there at some point. Can we build some sort of smart AI agent that is able to understand the business really well and schedule meaningful and accurate content across our social media channels? And then the last thing is possible client notifications. So one thing that we try and encourage in our build is keeping the client aware of what we're doing. A lot of people will build a fixed price project and then try and keep the client in the dark as much as possible because too many variations going to cause issues. Essentially, an agency doesn't want the client knowing too much because then there's more feedback, more variation, and it's a fixed price scope. And so some people prefer to try and keep the client in the dark to avoid having to do a lot of iterations and variations that are out of scope. We don't want to do that. We want to keep the client in the light. We want them to understand why things are happening. And if we're sending messages and we've got developers sending messages about certain issues in a project, we can use an AI to provide smart notifications to a client on why things might be going really well, or possibly why things might be taking a little bit longer than expected, why things might be slightly out of scope, how much third-party services cost, etc. So all sorts of smart client notifications to essentially keep the client afloat and understanding of how the business operates. So that concludes the introduction video on this 14-day series on how I am going to build the most efficient and AI-powered CRM system on the planet in 2025, and possibly for the cheapest price as well. So if any of these features look like things that you'd really like to have in your business's processes, I think arguably most of these features can save you hundreds of hours. I think the value in a lot of these features, and especially these features combined, for some businesses can be upwards of 6 figures, maybe even 7 in extreme scenarios. So if you want to stay afloat with how all of this is working, subscribe to me on YouTube. If you want to ask questions, feel free to join our completely free community. The link for that is going to be in the description. And yeah, I'm looking forward to getting cracking on this and being completely transparent and showing you guys how we go about building this and how we can implement these processes to hopefully make the project manager and everyone involved in our product life cycle's life a whole lot easier and a whole lot smoother. So appreciate you watching and see you soon.